Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I know here in our building, we have a few more people coming in and getting registered, which is great. We're monitoring all of our online guests as well. If you are online, you make sure you are muted. We're hearing some people in the room. If you just make sure that you're muted, that would be appreciated. We might have a few. There we go. Okay, great. Well, welcome again. My name is Kate England. I'm the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Northeast Iowa. And we are so happy to host our board fundamentals, which is a series that we provide a couple of years throughout our region. And again, we're a virtual option and an in-person. So welcome to everyone. We appreciate you taking time to be here with us this afternoon. So just a couple things about the Community Foundation of Northeast Iowa. We are a community foundation that serves across our 20-county region. So I think we've got representatives that are joining us from all over. It was fun to look through the RSVP list of everyone that's joining us today. So folks right here in the Cedar Valley and Waterloo Cedar Falls area. I know we have some Denver folks here with us, Denver, Iowa, right? Again, just great to have representatives, both staff members that work at nonprofits and also board members that represent those important organizations. So again, we're really grateful that we can be part of your charitable story. Of course, what we do is connect generous people in our across our region to nonprofits doing that great work primarily through grant making. We grant out around $9 million a year or so throughout our region. We have a great group of volunteers that serve our community foundation. I think 250 or so. It's a lot. And we could not do our important work without our important volunteers across our region. And of course, our staff. We have 15 staff that serve our region and provide services from donor relations, charitable giving, grant making, financial management, all those important things. So we really acknowledge that it does take a village to manage a nonprofit, just like it does for each of you here today. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Angie Widner, who is our Vice President of Community Impact, and she's going to tell a little bit more about our day together and introduce Gordon. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
And right with
yes,
you.
I'm going to, okay.
Screen.
Good afternoon to those of you here in the room with us and also all of you joining us virtually. Thank you so much for making the time for this. We're excited to present our June 2025 board fundamental session called Governing Through Change, Best Practices for Nonprofit Board. And as Gordon and I have discussed this session, we really just talked about how vital it is right now for nonprofits to get very strong on their basics. And sometimes not basic, sometimes the things that we don't always have in place, but definitely need to have in place. So we're very excited to have you with us today.
Thank you.
You're a real joy.
Well, that's very nice. And likewise, likewise.
And so I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping, particularly for those of you here, but this applies to you out there as well. There are snacks, hopefully in your pantry. For those of you here, there are snacks on the back as well as water. If you go out the double doors here and go to your right, you'll find restrooms around the corner. This is a 2-hour session, so you should feel free to get up whenever you need to take care of yourself in that way. For those of you joining us virtually, if you wouldn't mind dropping your name and your organization in the chat, just so we know who's here with us. And then also know that throughout the presentation, if you have questions or comments, those kinds of things, we'll be monitoring the chat and we can bring those to Gordon's attention throughout the presentation. And as we talked about this presentation, you said conversational is good.
Yeah.
You
questions.
like it?
My first slide, the title slide is Ask Questions.
So. Yeah, absolutely. So if you're virtual, please do so as well. We are recording this session and Gordon has agreed to let us send that out afterwards. So I'll be sending you an email with some of the resources, the recording, and also an evaluation after today's session. So let me introduce to you Mr. Gordon Fischer. Gordon Fischer has been an active Iowa lawyer for 30 years. He graduated from the University of Iowa, where he served as a student government leader and then received his law degree, summa cum laude, from Southern Illinois University. After law school, Gordon clerked for the Iowa Court of Appeals before joining the Des Moines firm of Bradshaw, Fowler, Proctor, and Fairgave, PC. At the firm, he became a partner and gained a reputation for skilled and conscientious litigation in all areas of law, with a focus on employment law.
Mm-hmm.
In 2013, Gordon left litigation to pursue his passion for philanthropy as vice president of gift planning strategies for the Community Foundation of Greater Des Moines. He had the privilege of helping donors plan and achieve their charitable goals.
That was my second choice. My first choice was this community foundation.
Oh,
You didn't even get an interview.
there's still time.
They're like such high level.
I'll call you, Gordon.
In 2014, Gordon received a Chartered Advisor in Philanthropy designation from the American College of Financial Services. Also in 2014, he founded Gordon Fischer Law Firm with its sole mission of helping nonprofits with their legal needs. He can be reached at gordonfisherlawfirm.com. I'll send that out. And also just want to note that he provides free consulting for nonprofits. So if you have a particular issue, he could be your first go-to to start to see what kind of legal advice you can get and maybe continue legal advice after that. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Gordon.
Well, that introduction was so nice. I just need to sit down because it's not going to get any better.
Time to get to work, Gordon.
Yeah, right. So I really meant what I said, that I think this is just an absolutely wonderful community foundation. I've known the leadership here for years, decades, I think at this point, many years, and leadership that's not in the room and staff that's not in the room as well. So I think you're very lucky for those that work here with this community foundation to do so, because I think they do a fantastic job. I really mean that. I'm not just saying that because there's two leaders in the room. I don't every speech that I've invited, but I did want to make time for you guys here. So we've got a nice crowd here. We've got a nice crowd online. I'm delighted. And I wanted to begin by talking about 4 challenges, you might say, trying to word it a little diplomatically, 4 challenges that I think are coming together and maybe present a unique opportunities for nonprofit. I think one is that both federal and state funding is in flux. I have a friend that is a professor at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois. All their grants have been frozen. That's just a big example from out of state. But just to give you an idea, there's a lot of tumult with regard to federal spending and also state spending. So if you're relying on that, that's going to be an issue for you for sure, right? Number 2, I think there is a lot of legislation. There's legislation that is literally called the Big Beautiful Bill that has passed the House. It's going to the Senate. A different version will pass the Senate. They'll come together, presumably, and figure something out. In both the Senate and House versions, there were provisions that affected nonprofits in various ways. I'm not going to get into it right now because Lord knows it could change 100 times or 1,000 times between now and when the bill is passed, or if the bill is passed. But that is going to be, I think, also a unique challenge because you don't really know what's coming down the pike in terms of federal changes. Third, you may recall, you guys will no doubt recall that several years ago there was changes made to the tax code, 2017 tax act, is that right? Where the standard deduction was blown up. It was raised really high. And that meant that more and more people were taking the standard deduction. Typically, obviously, when a taxpayer is sitting down, they add up all their deductions. They look at the standard deduction. They look at their itemized deduction. Whichever one is bigger, that's the one they take. Prior to 2017, the standard deduction was low enough that most taxpayers took itemized deductions, including the charitable deduction. Now it's the reverse. Because the standard deduction is so large, people are itemizing far less. And I think that's something that nonprofits have to navigate. And fourth, and I want to step around this gingerly because I have strong feelings about this, and I know other folks have strong feelings about this that maybe aren't the same as mine or perhaps even directly opposed to mine. which is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's some folks, some nonprofits where that DEI is in their very DNA, in their very essence. That is part of their entire mission. That's frankly kind of how I feel. I also understand there are people all along the political spectrum that feel differently than that. But I would say for a lot of nonprofits, that's a fourth challenge. We're not going to get into debate today because I don't think we can resolve anything. But DEI and frankly, an attack on DEI is, certainly a fourth and final issue. As I said, and as Angie was kind enough to say, please ask questions. For me to sit here and 2 hours, bark at you or talk at you for 2 hours is really would really be a drag. Trust me, I've spent a lot of time with myself at this point, and it's not going to be fun. I'm 60. I know myself well enough. So are there any questions that people have burning, like they came here and now I've talked about these 4 challenges or opportunities or issues, anything that people want to open up about right off the start? Okay.
It says, please explain the tax deduction.
Please explain the tax deduction conversation more. So the standard deduction is now large enough where a lot of people do not itemize because it's a question of taking the standard deduction or itemized deductions. And so since folks now pick the standard deduction, most folks, not all, you have to keep in mind every taxpayer is unique and different, has different assets and all that. But most people are not using the charitable deduction as much, I guess I'd say, right? The charitable deduction is not being used as much, and it's not as valuable, right? If you think about it, doesn't have the same value as it did before 2017. Not even getting into whether that's good or bad. It's math, right? So I think the conversation we have to have with donors, it used to center around a lot around the charitable deduction. Now I think we have to talk about other tax advantages. And I think there's 2 different ways to do that. One is bundling, and I am standing in the perfect place to talk about bundling. Why? Donor advised funds, right? Funds that you open up at your community foundation. So one of your donors can give a $5,000 donation or open up a fund here for $5,000. And what is the federal tax and state tax deduction they receive immediately this year for $5,000, the year of the gift, right? Right. So bundling. So that is a way to obviously get your charitable deduction in one fell swoop. And you can sort of give out, as you know, these guys will be happy to tell you anytime all about their funds, but you can give it out all at once. You can give it out in pieces, right? You get the deduction all at once, dole it out kind of at your convenience, so to speak, or at your wish, with your wishes. The other second way is, I think, getting away from cash assets only. I think we need to look more at non-cash assets. And I'm really not a salesman for the community foundation. I mean, I'm a booster of this community foundation, but I think the community foundation can play a key part in that, because some of your nonprofits can handle stocks, real estate, personal property, jewelry, paintings, right? Retirement benefit plans. Other nonprofits maybe don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the personnel, the people, the time, the energy to do that. That's when you can partner with the community foundation to get those non-cash asset gifts in. So I think that is really important to talk about non-cash gifts, because those non-cash gifts can have special tax ramifications that are beneficial to the donor. For example, publicly traded stock, you can get a break on your capital gains tax. In fact, you can pay no capital gains tax on stock that you transfer directly to a nonprofit. So that's an example of kind of broadening the conversation. Yep.
Gordon, Matt Tapscott, who's online, had asked that question about the tax deduction, and he, I think, would like to speak. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Okay,
He's at the
Matt.
bottom of the screen
Sure.
there.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Our personal tax preparer several years ago in relation to the 2016 tax code changes and standardized deductions. Long story short is most of the donors that we have in our small nonprofit are small dollar donors. And so is the 2017 tax code change that impacts folks like myself who, are not going to make a large dollar donation, but we can't write that off either, that $100, $500 donation. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because that's who donates to our organization out of their pocket.
Yeah, Matt, I'm not trying to start any sort of fight.
No, not at all.
It affects the small donors less than the big donors, I think. I mean, if you're a big donor and you make a 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, 100, we know there are donors out there that can make those large gifts. You're hoping, I think, for a charitable deduction back, right? You're thinking, I'm going to get a big old charitable deduction back. And you may not with the huge standard deduction. You just may not. The small dollar donors, obviously, if you're giving 100, 500, maybe you're not as concerned about the charitable deduction. At least that's been my experience. Now, again, every donor is different. Every nonprofit is different. But I would say it affects large donors more than small, but everybody's different. And in any case, it's something we need to be aware of to all donors. That the charitable deduction, which was once, I used to stand up here and preach about, amen, everybody, let's talk about the charitable deduction. That's not what I do anymore. That's not what you folks probably do anymore either, right? There's other advantages to donation you need to talk about. Yes.
Yeah, Gordon, I would jump on that as well and just say, I think more than ever, it's really important for nonprofits right now to be really clear about their mission and the work that they're doing and the difference that they're making in their community, their world, their space that they're occupying as a nonprofit. So donors can clearly see that they want to be invested in your work, whether it is a small gift or a large gift. I think it's even a more competitive time, if you want to call it competitive time, for nonprofits to be really clear about how they're using those charitable dollars, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about, or the main thing I wanted to talk about today, was a foundation. Not the foundation as in charitable foundation, but the foundation of like this building. I know we have a couple folks here whose nonprofit is building a performance center, right? Okay, well, what's the fun part about building a performance center? Well, probably designing the stage, the seats, maybe the right artwork, making sure it's comfortable, making sure there's enough room in the lobby, all that. But ultimately, what's really important is that the structure is sound and that it has a sound foundation. That's more important, no matter how beautifully it's decorated, no matter how functional it is, no matter how comfortable the patrons or donors are there, it's got to have a good foundation. And especially in stormy weather, right? In tough weather, snow, rain, sleet, right, that we get in Iowa, you want a foundation that can withstand dark and stormy times. So what do I mean when I say a foundation? I'm going to kind of go through this, but let me kind of throw it out at you all at once, and then we'll kind of jump around a little bit. First, I think you really need to look closely at your articles of incorporation, your bylaws. They should not be somewhere sitting on the shelf. They should be being used every day or every meeting at least, particularly your bylaws, which are your internal operating procedures. It's critically important that if somebody is looking at your foundation, I'm guessing one of the first things they'll look at, besides kind of navigating your website, right, is your actual articles of incorporation, which are available on the Iowa Secretary of State's website, and your bylaws, which, are not available publicly, but presumably if a donor asks for them, you'll provide them. So it's really important that donors supporters, friends, the community, look at your articles of incorporation and bylaws and have faith in them. They look good. They look clean. They cover the issues that you need covered. A couple of things that I see people miss in the bylaws, and I'm jumping around a little bit in the outline, so forgive me. But one thing I see people miss, a couple things I see people miss in the bylaws is indemnification. That could also be in the articles. Indemnification occurs if there is say a lawsuit or some sort of complaint against the nonprofit and specifically the board members. So I'll pick on myself. So Gordon Fischer is sitting on a board and of the nonprofit is sued, or there's some sort of administrative complaint and I'm named personally. Okay. I can be personally held liable, right? As a board member, I'm kind of in charge of among with the other board directors, I'm kind of in charge of the nonprofit. So what the nonprofit wants to do is indemnify me. If I have to pay court costs, attorney's fees, if, gosh forbid, there's the lawsuit successful or whatever, you want to be sure that I'm indemnified. In other words, the nonprofit will pick up my bill. You also want to make sure, and this probably should be in your bylaws, that you're willing to buy insurance. It's called different things, but D&O insurance, directors and officers liability insurance, definitely make sure that's up to date. You're paying it. Your insurance agent or your insurance representative is saying, yeah, your coverage is good enough to cover most things or almost everything. Another important provision for your bylaws might be, frankly, removing somebody from the board. Every once in a while, despite your best efforts, despite everyone's best efforts, there's someone who just doesn't, I think a word young people use a lot is vibe, right? That just doesn't vibe, right? There isn't a good vibe between this person and the rest, or maybe a couple people and the rest of the board. And I've run across several times where the nonprofit didn't have a mechanism in their bylaws to remove that board member. And so you need a removal provision for sure. I also think that I mentioned insurance and maybe having something that will buy the maximum amount of insurance or some words to that effect. I think also you want to be sure that you have a clear procedure for amendments. So you come, you think of everything, you really, you have a nonprofit lawyer look over your bylaws and they're all shiny and clean and new and you post them on your website and you're super proud of them, but something comes up that you didn't anticipate, or maybe there's a change in federal law, like I was talking about earlier, or what have you, and you want to make a change. It's really important that there be an amendment provision in both your articles of incorporation and your bylaws, frankly, and in really any written policy where there's a kind of an easy direct path, or at least direct path, maybe not easy necessarily, but a direct path to making amendments. That is absolutely, critical, mission critical. A dissolution clause, I do think is required, and I think most people will have that in their articles of incorporation. The duration, I assume that every once in a while I'll run into a nonprofit that for some reason has put a set duration, so like 50 years, 100 years. I think you probably want to say, you want to have a duration clause and say our duration is perpetual, which is the lawyer word for forever. And then, of course, if you dissolve, you dissolve, but you want to keep that runway as long and as open as you can. I think one thing I thought a lot about is the election and retainment of the board of directors. And, I think almost any kind of system would work. I think there would be kind of two things I would ask you to think about. I'm not sure I have the answer, but I think they should be reflected in your articles and probably in your bylaws, more likely. One is that you can, that the terms are staggered. and that you have the ability through your bylaws to even move people election terms around to make sure that not everybody is going off at once or not everybody's going on at once. You're not, losing half your, you know what I mean? So it's a staggered kind of a nice evolution. And if things get cattywampus somehow with people resigning from the board, you can kind of rejigger things, right? That's one thing. Another thing that you might want to consider regarding directors, and I haven't come to a answer on this yet, but I think everybody should consider it, is term limits. I'm kind of 50-50. I kind of I think I see the benefits to term limits, and I also see some, disadvantages to term limits. I think they're both pretty obvious, right? The benefits are that, you kind of keep the board fresh and kind of keep the board moving and recycling. You don't have people that are just there. It's also, got to be careful how I say this, but it's also a little bit of a way to get someone off the board without kicking them off the board, right? They're up, they're up for, their term limit is going to soon be hit. So something to consider. On the other hand, do you want to, what if somebody is the board member? I'm sure there's several people in this room, many people in this room, and many more online, where they are just terrific directors, terrific stewards of their nonprofits, and they want to continue, and you want them to continue. So I guess I would just say maybe make a conscious, intentional decision to have term limits or not have term limits. I think it goes both ways. It may depend on how many people are on your board. Is it hard to recruit for your particular board? Is it more a general nonprofit where it's easier to recruit? Some of those factors may play in. I kind of focused on the bylaws. Any questions about bylaws while I was waxing semi-eloquently about them? Okay.
I was gonna go back to the deductions.
Yes.
And I just talked to our CPA. He has some people that don't even use their Endow Iowa tax credit. Is
Yeah.
that part of the whole, and how do we try to manipulate that if we can?
Yeah, so the question is about the Endow Iowa tax credit. So that has undergone tremendous change, to say the least, and probably will continue to. About all I can really say is similar to the federal and state charitable deduction. I used to come to this wonderful community foundation and other community foundations and preach the gospel of charitable deductions and also the Endow Iowa tax credit. I don't do that anymore, right? Because it's just not what it was. I'm not saying it's not, it's just not what it once was. It's not a big, I see Kay getting a little antsy back there, but maybe not. Okay.
No, I was just going to add clarification about the tax credit. I'm happy to maybe have a conversation at the end about that if we have time.
Yeah,
Just so
perfect.
you don't get too off track, because I know you have a lot of really great information to share with us.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
happy to answer that question.
yeah. Terrific. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. Articles of incorporation. I think that in addition to the amendment and indemnification, dissolution, length, one thing that I see people run into is member provision in their articles of incorporation or their bylaws, often in their articles of incorporation. Now, this is really annoying for people that aren't lawyers. In fact, it's kind of annoying for lawyers too, but there's certain words that mean one thing in the law and another thing in street parlance, right? So for example, you have a community theater that's a nonprofit. They have a membership program. In other words, for X amount of dollars, you get free tickets or better tickets or first chance at tickets or free popcorn, whatever. For a membership, there's a membership. That's not the way I'm using members. That's not the way the revised Iowa Nonprofit Corporation Act uses the word members. That is a legal term, and it's folks that actually have the right to vote on your board of directors and actually have the right to do some other things as well. They have certain rights. Members are really valuable in the for-profit context for several reasons we just don't have time to get into. In the nonprofit context, rarely, if ever, are they helpful. If you want somebody as a quote member, in the legal term, just put them on the board of directors. But I see a lot of folks with articles of incorporation that talks about members or even says there's a class of members. I think maybe they need membership, right? But the issue then becomes they have voting rights, they have other kinds of rights. And if you try to take that away, the Iowa Code makes you give them certain notice, and they'll have to vote on whether their rights can be taken away. So check your articles, check your bylaws. It's probably in your articles. I think every nonprofit's different. I would say the default would be that to say that you do not have members. This nonprofit does not have members. That's what I would say. Must-have policies. I'm kind of jumping to page 3 if you're following along on the outline. We've talked about articles. We've talked about bylaws. Let's talk about some of the policies. You recall, I think everybody probably remembers, you filed your Form 990, right? Or will be filing your Form 990. So every nonprofit is required annually to file for IRS Form 990. And there's a short version, there's an easy version, much like for individual taxpayers, there's different versions. On the long version of the 990 form, the annual tax return for nonprofits, it asks about 10 different policies, not all in a row, not super explicitly. It is the IRS after all. They sort of like, in a roundabout way, ask about 10 different policies. For example, the 990 or the last version I looked at says that, okay, how do you resolve conflicts of interest? How do you resolve conflicts of interest? Do you have a written policy to resolve conflicts of interest? Okay, so they're sort of asking you, right? Do you have a conflict of interest policy? Now those policies are not required. So they ask about these 10 policies, but they're not required. They are not legally required. You don't have to have them. But obviously the IRS is signaling very strongly, in my opinion, that you should have these 10 policies, that you should have all these policies, and they should have been looked at by the board and passed by the board and all that good stuff. I'm going to just read them off. Conflicts of interest, confidentiality, document retention and destruction, financial, fundraising, gift acceptance, investment, IRS, public disclosure, and whistleblower. So I think that's on page 3, right? Bottom. So, if you're asking me, going back to our performance center and its foundation, the first kind of layer of the foundation for your wonderful performance center would be really shiny, new, up-to-date articles and bylaws along with these 10 policies. And I want to talk about the 10 policies in a little more depth. Got away from my slides. I got so excited talking to everybody. Okay, so we're talking about the 990. One of the policies that you should have, and you'll notice it's in the 10 that I read, is the IRS Form 990 review form policy. In other words, a policy that sets specific deadlines of, for example, the executive committee reviews the 990 by such and such date, X amount of days or X amount of months before it's due. Then it goes to the full board. That's X amount of days or X amount of months before it's due. Then, if it's sent, people don't like it, how do they register objections? Do you include the objections with the Form 990? That sort of stuff. So there should be a very routinized kind of almost a recipe, like 2 eggs and, just a step-by-step progress toward filing the 990. Why do I say that? A couple reasons. One is that I'd say twice a month, I get a call from a nonprofit that either didn't file its 990, somehow missed it, or even that they didn't file their 990 for the last 3 years. They thought they were, their parent organization was going to do it. Their treasurer told them that it was done. Their treasurers kind of left town and found out they didn't do it. All sorts of reasons. Of course, if you miss it 3 years in a row, you get the so-called death penalty. You have to kind of start over. You have to basically apply again for nonprofit status. And if you miss it once, there's all sorts of fines that come with it. Now, if you write a nice letter or have me write a nice letter, you'll probably get out of being fined, but you just don't want to be in that situation where, you haven't filed on time with the 990. So I think it's really important to have a 990 policy. The second thing is sometimes nonprofits, you got to get this done. There's some pressure to get it done. And so you sort of just kind of, I don't want to say rush it, because of course you're trying to get things done in a quick manner, but you want to be sure that people are having directors are having genuine feedback to and with your 990 form, right? I mean, you want everybody to be comfortable with the 990 form that you submit. If there's ever a question, you don't want to say, well, half the board didn't like this and half the board did. No, you want to make sure that everybody is on board, and a policy can do that. And if nothing else, if there are questions raised about your Form 990, you could say, here's my super cool, super perfect IRS Form 990 policy that we follow. And that's going to help, right? So I do think that IRS Form 990 review policy is absolutely necessary. We already talked about articles of incorporation, bylaws. Okay, document retention policy. The IRS has all sorts of rules requiring folks to have a document requiring folks to keep certain documents for a certain length of time. If you think about it, you don't want to throw away or destroy documents early. You also don't want to throw them away late, because you might get into a position. I worked for a large law firm where you just had this gigantic storage facility full of files, right? Where, it was difficult, not impossible, but difficult to kind of pull out what you need. So a document retention policy is going to give you the opportunity to kind of do what I call government sanctioned spring cleaning. So you not only keep the documents that you need to keep, you get rid of the documents that you can, and you can move forward better, easier, more efficiently, more effectively in that manner, right? I think you need a fundraising policy. I think there needs to be ethical standards. For example, that you won't, you'll only use honest, straightforward, clear, plain language in fundraising. You won't make kind of promises in fundraising, like we'll do X, Y, and Z for sure if you give us, Z amount of dollars. I think you want to make absolutely clear that if a donation is going to actually hurt someone financially, I mean, hurt someone in that maybe there's a question about whether they can afford it, right? That is sort of looked at and called out. If you have a third party do fundraising for you, that they follow a certain set of rules, you'll hire them in a certain way. They will sign off on these set of rules. So, I mean, what's more important than fundraising? So I think you need a good written policy. I also think you need to have consistency in how you receive and handle contributions. Again, a little bit of a recipe, step by step. Receive the donation, log the donation, right? On your Excel spreadsheet or whatever. Send a thank you note, follow up, exactly like that. So it should be, again, routinized when you're receiving donations. Gift acceptance policy. Earlier, we were talking about the critical importance of receiving non-cash assets. As Kay said, if competitive is the right word, right word, we're in a world with nonprofit world is becoming more competitive. There's no question. If that's indeed the word we choose to use. And the one way to kind of deal with that is to expand beyond cash and look at things like publicly traded stock, look at things like personal property, jewelry, paintings, collections, look at things like farms or gifts of grain, look at things like retirement benefit plans. And it's really difficult to do that without a gift acceptance policy. You don't want a donor to come with you with a non-cash asset, whatever it is, use your imagination. You don't want for them to come to you with a non-cash gift and, you kind of scrambling to figure out, can you accept this? Should you accept this? It's going to take you a couple of weeks. You need to kind of make those decisions, I would say, insofar as that's possible beforehand. So you put certain categories of gifts in certain buckets. We will accept this. We won't accept this. We will accept this if it's reviewed by our gift acceptance committee or executive committee. We will review this. We may accept this if XYZ conditions are met, whatever it may be. I do want to talk a little bit, just briefly, and give you a little bit of advice, fundraising advice. I think retirement benefit plans are tremendously underused as an asset. And what do I mean by retirement? And I'm stepping a little away from the gift acceptance policy. It's a little bit of a timeout for just a little kernel of fundraising help. So retirement benefit plans are 401ks, IRAs, SEPs, the whole alphabet soup that people use for their retirement, right? And this is very easily given to charity. How? Well, when you have a retirement benefit plan, you may or may not have noticed it, but it's going to ask you, if you pass away, what do you want to have happen to your retirement benefit plan, to your IRA, to your 401k? What do you want to do? Gordon Fischer, you're hit by a bus. Where do you want your IRA to go? Well, to have my IRA go to this community foundation, all I have to do is request the form from whoever holds my IRA, bank or institution, get that form, put down the name of the community foundation, maybe find out your tax ID number or something if you want to get fancy, but really just fill in whoever you want to receive the funds from your retirement benefit plan. And you don't need to talk to a lawyer. I mean, I don't think talk to me is that horrible, but anyway, you don't have to talk to a lawyer. You don't have to, seek accounting advice necessarily or anything like that. It's something you can do in just working with your plan holder. And it's super easy that way. It's also really tax advantageous. I can't get into the whole thing, but the bottom line is it's taxed differently and worse than other assets. If King Lear has 4 daughters, okay? King Lear has 4 daughters, and he gives one the castle, one the painting, one $100,000, and let's say they're all worth $100,000, and one an IRA worth $100,000. You with me? Kind of, more or less. The last daughter, the daughter who gets the IRA, is not going to get the same amount as the other 3. Because the IRA, 401k are pre-tax benefits. So there's going to be taxes taken out. They have to be spent in a certain way. Yes, you can stretch them out, but it's just not, if you're going to give a gift out of all your assets, the retirement benefit plan may be the first asset to look at because it's easy and it's tax advantageous. At least tax advantageous compared to other assets. Folks with me kind of on that, or okay. So I kind of feel that is underutilized. Also, publicly traded stocks. If you're talking about stock in Gordon Fischer law firm, that's probably not a great idea for a bunch of reasons, but I'm what you call a closed corporation. My stocks aren't for sale, right? The family restaurant down the block, the plumber down the block, they have a closed corporation. You can't buy and sell their stocks, right? That can also be donated, those stocks, closed corporation stocks, but it's very, very, very complicated. What are they worth? You know, what would a buyer pay for them? All that kind of stuff. Publicly traded stocks, you can pick up a newspaper, right? You can pick up the Wall Street Journal and say Ford Motor stock is worth, you know, $10 a share. Everybody in the world agrees on today's date, it's worth $10 a share, right? And it's publicly traded. It's almost like cash in a certain sense. And so publicly traded stock can be another thing that's pretty easy. Now you need a stockbroker. Again, I urge you, if you don't have necessarily the expertise or bandwidth, work with the community foundation on that. I think they can help you. But again, there are certain tax advantages to giving stock. I mentioned earlier, you can avoid capital gains. So can't get into that as deeply as I'd like, but those are two non-cash assets I would look at. Again, it's going to be really difficult to accept those or any non-cash asset without some sort of clear written gift acceptance policy. Yes.
Gordon, there's a question online. Stacy Schroeder.
Stacy Schroeder, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. I think these, you're explaining it in a way for me who doesn't typically work with all these options. I am understanding it. So I appreciate that. I'm a director of a
why don't
nonprofit
you
in
have your
Fayette
camera
County.
on?
We have a mentoring program because I'm driving.
Oh, that's
So
okay.
that is
Be
why.
careful driving,
But,
Stacey. I'm sorry.
We have,
I was just being a
No,
smart
no,
aleck.
you're
I'm
good.
sorry.
oh, well, thank you. I appreciate those two. So we have a youth serving organization. We have a mentoring program. We do a lot of kind of youth programming activities, have a lot of grant funding, of course, but donations are a huge part of kind of what we do. I appreciate the information, but how do I get to a conversation that is like, oh, well, you'd like to make a donation, but maybe you don't have the cash, and then kind of open this whole floodgate? Is this, I guess, how do I get to the next step?
Yeah, Stacey, it's a great question. First, I love mentorship organizations. I have been a lawyer 30 years, and this month actually was my lawyer anniversary. And as I thought back, really the thing I've been most proud of, there's some things I'm kind of overlook when it comes to looking back over 30 years. But one of the things I'm very proud of is the fact that I was lucky enough to mentor some really special young people. And the really interesting thing is you end up, I think, learning as much or more from your mentees. And it's a long story, but just the other day, I had a lengthy phone call with a young lawyer, and I was like, man, you really taught me a couple of things today, right? You taught me a new way to look at things. Okay. Anyway, Stacey, thanks for what you do.
Thank you. Yes.
So I think the first thing to do is to get a gift acceptance policy in place. So when you say, how do we begin this whole conversation? I think you want to narrow down what gifts you're actually going to accept. Now, maybe if you're just beginning, you don't want to accept real estate because there could be a whole bunch of liabilities with that, right? Potential liabilities, right? There could be an ongoing tire fire. Right? It could be built on, you know, who knows what, right? So there's some other things. I just talked about closed stock, right? Closed corporation stock. That's really complicated. There's other types of non-cash assets you may want to avoid. I did talk about publicly traded stock and retirement benefit plans. I think you'd want to have your gift acceptance policy say, look, we're going to accept those kind of gifts with some oversight by your executive committee, by your gift acceptance committee, whoever, and then ultimately by the board of directors. But in the meantime, I wouldn't begin the conversation necessarily, Stacey, and I know you weren't like directly quoting yourself. You were just kind of saying this is how you might talk to a donor. I would not begin the conversation by saying you don't have enough cash, so blah, blah, blah. But I would say, and I'm not suggesting that they would, Stacy,
Yeah.
but I would say, look, we would love to accept your cash donations, and we have these two other options, and we have a drop-down menu on our website, and we have a gift acceptance policy, and we have a drop-down menu that extols the virtues of stock, publicly traded stocks, donating public traded stocks, and we have a drop-down on our website that extols the virtue of retirement benefit plans and explains it. And then if you and the board can kind of get educated with my help, another lawyer's help, maybe a financial advisor's help on, those assets and how to accept those assets. Again, I think community foundations could be a terrific partner in this. Yeah, that's how I'd kind of get from A to, maybe not A to Z, but A to L or something, like a good way, a good chunk of the way. That's how I would do it.
For sure. That does make sense. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for making that seem more manageable.
Stacy, I also want to add, and for everybody, I've been kind of avoiding this because it opens up a whole rabbit hole we can't get into, but estate planning. Everybody should have an estate plan. Absolutely everybody, young person, older person, whatever their circumstance. You're going to pass away. You should make plans for what you want to have done with your assets, right? So for reasons completely unrelated even to philanthropy or charity, everybody needs an estate plan. So you'd be doing a favor, you nonprofits, you wonderful board members and nonprofit leaders, in telling people, hey, you should have an estate plan. And here are the 3 or 4 or 5 kind of obvious reasons you should have an estate plan. And by the way, if you'd like, in your estate plan, you can leave money or a percentage or what have you, a bequest to us, to our nonprofit. And again, I think that's fairly easily done. I think if you have something on your website, if you have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different attorneys that do estate planning, I've often found that financial advisors can really be good missionaries in a sense. They understand. Financial advisors absolutely understand that everybody needs an estate plan. And so if you talk to financial advisors, they'll be, one of the 4 or 5 or 6 things they tell every client will be set up an estate plan. Or if you have an estate plan, when was the last time you revisited it? So another way, it's not necessarily non-cash assets, but it's I don't know how you want to define it. It's different than just accepting cash today. But one thing you want to consider is whether you want to urge folks to do some estate planning, and if they do, include you in their will or trust. Now, I talked a lot about websites. One thing that I think is hugely important is once you have, so you've got this performance center that you built, and it's just absolutely wonderful. Okay, well, aren't you going to share it with the world? Aren't you going to take pictures and post it? You're going to have a grand opening, right? You're going to have a first performance. You're going to have the newspaper there. You're going to have photographers taking special pictures. In the same way, when you get your articles and bylaws all great, shiny, new, sparkly, when you have these 10 policies in place, when you've done some research and worked with a lawyer or financial advisor about non-cash assets, when you've done all this, I think you too want to declare it to the world. So the articles, the bylaws, the 10 policies, and plus some other policies we may talk about, these should be, I think, on your website. I think there should be a drop down or a button or however it works on your particular website where people can access those. Same with your IRS Form 990. The IRS Form 990 and the articles and bylaws, you have to give them out if somebody asks for them. It's a public disclosure requirement. And the Form 990s are searchable, as you know. So why not make it perfect, put it up on your website? I think donors, I think interested parties, potential donors will really want to see that. I think that will bode well or give a good impression of your organization, that you're up on things, that you're professional, that you're, up on things and professional, I guess.
Would you put the entire 990s on there or just the first page?
I would put the entire, this is me, I'd put the entire 990s. Now there is you got to be careful. There is a schedule B that asks you to list donors over a certain amount. Obviously you're not gonna, or should probably not put that. But so if there's donor information, maybe there's other schedules. I think that's the one schedule that contains donors, but I put the entire 990 on there.
Compensation.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with putting the whole thing on there because it's searchable anyway. So, you know, I mean, I guess it's harder to find than if it's on your website, but you know, I don't know. I just feel like it's searchable. Why, you know, make it perfect and put it up there. That's what I would say. Yes. I don't know that it talks about individual compensation. I think it's talking about compensation.
I think it's officers, isn't it?
Yeah, it depends on whether, yeah.
I want to jump back to the retirement plan. Question there to clarify. You mentioned designating the charitable organization possibly as a beneficiary. Are you also encouraging qualified charitable deductions?
I am, but there is a lot of tumult around the qualified charitable deduction at the federal level. That might be one of the things that's changed in the big, beautiful bill that's coming through. We don't know. But I mean, you know, I hate to kind of qualify it because the QCD is really great, but I'm a little careful about that just because I'm not sure what's going to happen to it.
Right now, it's pretty easy.
Right now, it's very easy. Absolutely. Right now, it's what, 72 and a half or older,
Yep.
$100,000. The tax trap is you can't like take it out, put it in your bank account and then give it to the charity. It has to go right to the charity. So I'm a little, I mean, right now it is good. I'm a little careful, I guess I'm a lawyer. I think like a lawyer, what can I say? But yeah, the QCDs are great. 72 and a half and above, $100,000 tax-free. Yes.
Just to clarify, it's still 70 and a half.
70 and a half. Sorry. What did I say?
Okay.
72 and a half. I think that, yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Isn't he a good board member?
I don't think he's merely good. I think he's great. That clarification was really needed. I was off by 2 years and that mattered.
Well, it's changed quite a few times.
Yeah.
You're good. You're good.
It's a little like a light switch. It's been on, the QCD has been on and off over the, you know, last 10 years or so.
So if I tell you that the max is actually 108,000, do I get a attaboy
Yes,
as well?
absolutely. Is it 108? I honestly did not know that. Okay.
It changes every year.
Yeah, it changes every year. Okay. Anyway, thank you. 108,000, 70 and a half. I knew there was a reason I didn't want to talk about it. Because I don't know it, I guess, as well as I thought. But yeah, so retirement benefit plans, great question. Other questions, concerns, comments? I feel like I've been kind of like.
If you go to our website too, there's a lot of really great information about some of those.
Yes, I should have said.
areas. So, and we can make sure that you have that link. Because we've got a big section out there on our website around professional advisors and how to make, you know, maybe tax-wise gifts and things. And of course, that's not just to the foundation, that can be to your organizations too. So feel free to go out there and borrow some information.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, relying, you know, using the community foundation as another great tool in your already existing toolbox is just really critically important. Confidentiality policy, I just meant thinking like a lawyer. And, you know, it does make me a little nervous when volunteers, for example, come in and are given or possibly have access to information like credit card numbers or, you know, anonymous donors, real identities, that sort of thing. For example, I know of a nonprofit in Cedar Rapids. They have a volunteer who comes in 10 to 4 or maybe 10 to 2 every single day, and they do data entry. That's what they do. That's their volunteering. That's their gift. Well, that's wonderful. That's awesome. I mean, that's a big help. But in doing that, they are getting information like credit card, mobile, you know, cell phone numbers. Not everybody wants their cell phone number given out. Now everybody wants to say, yeah, I gave to this organization, right? Some people want to remain anonymous, even addresses or things like that. And if you think about it, you know, you may have information about donors, personal information about donors, likes, dislikes, you know, what they've given in the past, who they've given in the past, and so forth, that you wouldn't necessarily want out there. So I do think it's important to have a confidentiality policy for those limited, very limited kind of special things that should be kept, secret, essentially. Now, I know I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth, and I just talked about, hey, put your whole 990 on the website, put your articles and bylaws on the website, put your 10 policies on your website. I still believe that, but I do think there are some bits of data that are truly confidential. And if you have someone coming in to do your data entry, if you have volunteers coming in who have access to that confidential information, I think you want some sort of agreement and some sort of policy. Especially like what happens if there is the consequences for what happens if someone doesn't live up to the confidentiality policy. So the 10 policies, here's kind of an 11th policy, social media policy. The IRS does not ask about a social media policy, but social media has become so pervasive and is used by so many nonprofits that I think you want to be careful and maybe have a policy of what you can say and can't say. I think, for example, you want kind of a chain of command, even if that chain of command is 2 people, one person writing the social media post, one person approving it, right? Of what can be said and not said. The internet is forever, so you need to be careful. Just few minutes ago, I gave out incorrect information. Well, it's a good thing that wasn't in a tweet or a Facebook post, because, that would have been up there forever. I could have taken it down, but it'd be available in some format forever. So you want to make sure that there is some sort of process for kind of vetting social media, and there's some do's and don'ts. I think the don'ts are pretty obvious. You want to steer clear of politics, because nonprofits aren't supposed to be involved in politics. In terms of, politics being candidate X versus candidate Y, that sort of thing. You want to be careful of getting involved in local controversies. I've seen sometimes school foundations, for example, not to pick on you guys, but where there's a local controversy involving teachers or something, and the foundation feels really strongly about it and weighs in. It may or may not be a good idea. At the least, you want to do it very intentionally, right? I think you have to look at board directors and staff particularly, and their own social media posts, if they're posting to a wide audience at all about their experience on the board or their experience with the nonprofit. Again, going into confidentiality, there's some things you may not want directors to say. There may be some parameters you want to set up. Sure, if a director wants to, repost about your big event next week, of course. They want to repost, hey, come contribute so we can build our amazing performance center, sure. But if they're talking about, a big disagreement the board had the last board meeting, that may not be as welcome. I'm not talking about censorship. I'm just talking about kind of intentionally setting up parameters. And I think you can avoid a lot of problems that way. Volunteer policy, I guess I already talked about that a little bit in context of confidentiality, right? But I think there's sort of some obvious do's and don'ts with volunteers as well, right? Like, don't act like an idiot. You can't put that, put that in the light, don't run around and don't show up drunk and that kind of stuff. Obvious things that you wouldn't want any volunteer to do, and most volunteers won't, but sort of the obvious do's and don'ts. I also think you may want, depending on what the volunteers are doing, if they're going out into the world, if they're going to clean up a park, or they're going to build, volunteer and build Habitat for Humanity, you may want some sort of release or waiver, right? If they're going out into the world and building something or cleaning something or making something. Okay, so we talked about the articles, we talked about the bylaws, we talked about the 10 policies. Then we added on a couple of policies. We added on a confidentiality, we added on a volunteer policy, right? We added on a social media policy. So that's a pretty good foundation. Let's go a little more. Let's build even a heavier foundation with employee documents. I think these apply even if you have just one employee. I have been fortunate enough not only to be able to give talks to community foundations, but also to HR groups about employment law. And as you can imagine, much like talking about nonprofit law in front of a bunch of nonprofit leaders, it's a little bit intimidating and they may know the law better than you do. But also, it's really interesting to get their reaction. So when I speak in front of HR groups, I always ask them, okay, if you have just one employee, should you have an employee handbook? All hands are always raised. Should you have a job description? All hands are always raised. Should you have an employment agreement? Most hands are raised. We could talk. There's maybe some situations where you don't need an employee agreement. If you have just one independent contractor, should you have an independent contractor agreement? All hands are raised. So some nonprofits feel like, well, we have one employee, but I think even with one employee, you want this stuff, or just a couple or 3 or 4 employees, a little more. I think you want this stuff in place. I think some of the you've all seen employee handbooks, right? In your civilian life, you kind of know what they consist of. So I won't spend much more time on it. I guess there's a couple things that if you look on Ken, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, so there's some key components, and thank you again for page 10. If you look on about the middle of page 10, there may be a few things that you want to make extra sure are in your employee handbook that sometimes are missed by both nonprofit attorneys and nonprofits and for-profits. One is a disclaimer. In other words, when is an employee handbook not an employee handbook? When it's a contract. And if you think about it, if you don't have a disclaimer saying this is not a contract, it could be viewed as a contract. So you need a disclaimer up front, bold, underlined. This does not constitute an employment contract. This is just an employee handbook with general guidelines. A superseding provision. This replaces the handbook we did a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This is the new handbook, completely supersedes all the others. Wiggle room. I think you need to probably adopt policies as you grow, right? So there better be some sort of process within your board about when to look at the employee handbook, when to update the employee handbook, how often, that sort of thing. At-will employment. We're an at-will employment state, which basically means you can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. You want to make sure that that is clear in your employee handbook. And an acknowledgement page. So a signature, date, printed name, and then you file. They keep a copy, you keep a copy, it's filed away. The amount of times that I've had not necessarily nonprofit, in fact, not nonprofit clients, but for-profit clients where they couldn't find certain documents in a personnel file. They swore they gave a warning, they can't find it. They can't find the entire personnel file. They can't find one evaluation. They can find the 7 of the 8 evaluations. That happens really frequently, surprisingly frequently. And so I haven't gotten to personnel files yet, but just as a heads up, along with making sure that they've signed the employee handbook and you've given a copy, you've given them a copy and you've kept a copy of that. Along with that, you need to make sure your personal personnel files, your personal personnel files are also kept up to date and contain everything they should. Employment agreements, it really depends on what you got going. If you've got somebody, let's say it's one employee and it's an executive director, then I tend to think that you should have an employment agreement because they're doing enough stuff where you kind of want an understanding between the nonprofit and the employee about what's expected and what the benefits are and what the salary is and what the legal legal protections are and so forth. But if you have a part-time administrative assistant or something where the duties are much more kind of prescribed or narrow, maybe you don't need an employment agreement. I mean, I could be kind of convinced in that situation, maybe you don't need an employment agreement. But again, I think, kind of a theme running throughout our discussion today is intentionality. In other words, you're making the intentional choice to have an employment agreement or not have an employment agreement after kind of considering who the employee is. Compensation. Okay, so this is really important because every once in a while, not so much in Iowa, but nationally, you'll read about some scandal where a CEO of a nonprofit or executive director of a nonprofit is being paid, what seems to be overly generous or maybe way overly generous amount. And then people are really sort of sore at the nonprofit and there's some sort of investigation. We know that for-profits basically can pay whatever they want, right, to their employees, to their officers, to their directors. There's really no particular limit, right? Nonprofits do have a limit, and that limit is reasonableness. You have to pay somebody a reasonable amount of compensation. And that's sort of a special word in the law where reasonableness sort of means an objective standard, right? Like what the average reasonable person would consider fair compensation for the position. Well, how practically do you figure that out? Well, the same way that you would in real estate, comps, right? If you're selling a house, you're buying a house, you're a real estate agent yourself, how do you set the price for your house? Well, in part, you're going to look for similar houses in your area, right? And you're going to say, well, they don't have a basement, so mine's worth more, or they, have a sunroom, so theirs is worth more, right? You kind of do and theirs is on the busy street, and mine's kind of in a secluded neighborhood, and all that kind of stuff. So you do comps. Similarly, for nonprofits, you need to do comparisons. Look for similar nonprofits in similar geographic areas, similar missions, similar size, similar total asset amount. What do they pay their folks? And so you probably need to do a little investigation, right, to make sure that you're in line. And again, part of it is having the compensation policy and just showing that you did it. In other words, look, we had a lawyer write us a compensation policy. We did comps. We went ahead and investigated it. Here are the 5 nonprofits we looked at as comps. Here are how they're similar to us. Here's how they're different to us. And this is what we decided in terms of compensation. I mean, if you have that, I think you're going to be safe, right? People raise a question, you can simply show them your work, like in math class, show your work, right? So that's what I have to say about compensation. Conflict of interest. This is a biggie. This happens all the time, sometimes without us even realizing it. So let's kind of take a simple example. You're a nonprofit. I won't pick on anybody here. You're a nonprofit X. You've got a board. You need to buy insurance. You need to buy directors and officers insurance. You need to buy liability insurance. You also take kids on field trips. So you want to get insurance, for the bus driver and something, God forbid, happens to the kids. Okay. There's somebody on your board that's an insurance agent. Okay. That is a conflict. Now, does that mean that you can't actually use that person's services? No, not necessarily. You just want to make sure that conflict is disclosed, that it's talked about as a board, that that person, you kind of treat that person the same way you treat anyone else. You don't just automatically give the business to them necessarily, but you talk to 3 or 4 or 5 or 2 insurance agents, compare them, and again, show your work as to why you picked, if you do, the insurance agent who happens to be on the board of directors. If, again, it just got to be disclosed. We also want the insurance agent, when that is discussed as to whether you want to fund those, buy those insurance policies, fund those insurance policies, you want the insurance agent / board director to step out. You don't want them to vote on it, right? A simple example, but it shows the kind of things that can happen all the time. What if I suppose it's not the insurance agent, but it's the spouse of the insurance agent that's on your board? I think it's the same issue. Again, the problem isn't necessarily the conflict of interest. It's that it's disclosed, it's open, everybody knows about it, it's discussed. To the extent appropriate, the person who has the conflict is excluded from certain discussions, excluded from voting. Absolutely key. Absolutely key. Questions, concerns, comments, compliments, insults?
Transparency is kind of what you're talking about too.
You're right. That is such a great point. So one of the themes that I sort of mentioned a minute ago, well, the theme I'm talking about, you're talking about now, very helpfully, is transparency. So that is a kind of a theme that's running throughout this talk, I hope, in terms of being more transparent. And I think that's to your benefit. It's the right thing to do, and it's a good thing to do both. Transparency is so important to build trust in your community, among your donors, among your volunteers. It's also, frankly, can be helpful in getting more donors and more volunteers, right? Or donors to give more, volunteers to volunteer more. So I think transparency is definitely a key theme in this entire talk, and should be for your nonprofit as well. And intentionality is sort of the other one. Make a decision as to whether you have an employment agreement or not intentionally. Your compensation is set intentionally, but looking at comps, right? Deciding to have term limits for directors, whether you have them or don't, you make that decision intentionally after kind of looking at the advantages and disadvantages. Other comments? Questions? Stacy, I hope you're being safe driving. But
I'm almost home. We're good. Thanks.
Okay. Welcome home. Welcome home. So an investment policy. One thing that may be part of your foundation, and I know some of you are just going to groan. It's like, man, you're giving me so much homework. I can't, we're stretched to the limit already. I can't do this. I think you got to think about a fund for a rainy day, right? Stormy weather may be ahead. We may be in the midst of a storm that we don't even realize the severity of. I think that an endowment, a rainy day fund is really a good idea, right? Just like it is for your personal life, right? If you talk to your financial advisor or any financial advisor, they'll say you need a rainy day fund in case your car breaks down, in case you're laid off, in case there's a medical issue. Similarly, for nonprofits, I think you want some sort of cushion in case there is a bad time. In some cases, some of you are going to be so successful, and maybe are already so successful, that you're going to have enough money to actually invest. You're going to have enough assets, enough capital to actually invest. And if you do get to that point, you're going to definitely want an investment policy that sets really strong parameters about what you will invest in and what you won't invest in, and kind of a percentage breakdown. We're going to put, I'm making this up off the top of my head, 30% in, general stocks, 25% in bonds, another 25% in D and EE bond, that sort of thing, right? So kind of a breakdown of what what different investment vehicles you're going to use. Also, you'll probably need an investment advisor and how you're going to choose the investment advisor, how often you're going to have the investment advisor report back to you. But it is kind of something to shoot for. If you're groaning now inside, just think maybe it's something to shoot for, not this year or next year, but in the future, building up enough money where you have a rainy day fund, you have an endowment, you even have money that you can invest. Yes.
I'm a financial advisor and
I knew that, but go ahead.
I've got a couple of past experiences as the board member or finance committee member.
Yes.
I'm also a financial advisor where the investment policy is critical, and to talk that out, because invariably the committee or board members underestimate the risk part of things, especially when interest rates were low, is, well, can't we do better than this, get a higher yield? And then you find some are more risk takers and some are more risk averse. And I'm just pointing out, it's imperative, because usually when you dig through the details and start talking out, are we good if this account balance is 20% lower than what you put in a year later? And things like that really start to get their attention and say, well, I didn't really mean that. Well, okay. And sometimes you just end up back at cash or short-term bonds because they really didn't want to take any risk.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I hope people online heard that. Jennifer, did you hear that? Others? Anita? Gail, could you hear that? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Sarah? Well, I'll repeat it in any case. It's such good advice. So we're lucky enough to have a financial advisor in the room. And when we're talking about investment policies, it's really important to work with your financial advisor, your investment advisor, to gauge your risk tolerance. Some nonprofits have very low risk tolerance. They're nervous about the board, outside folks, right? Folks in the community saying, holy cow, your endowment took a hit of 20% or whatever. So it's really important to gauge your risk and ask questions about, what if this happens? What if that happened? We all tend to think how things are now will be how they will be forever. Interest rates will never be high again, right? Interest rates will never be low again for that long, and so on. So I think it's really key, such a great point, that we've got to maybe we've got to do a thorough risk assessment. And maybe we end up just a cash or CDs or bonds with very low risk and very low yield, but very, very low risk as well. Or we decide we are a little more risk tolerant. But again, intentionality, making a full assessment and then deciding to kind of take it from there. Such a great point. Other questions, comments?
Gordon, I was just curious what you recommend generally for nonprofits to have in reserve funds. So even before I'm thinking about investing dollars, what should I have on hand to take care of my operation?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. Like, I think financial advisors for an individual would say X amount of months of income or something. Yeah. I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule. I think it depends on the nonprofit and what its goals are. I think what its liabilities are. And when I say liabilities, I'm mostly thinking about staff, right? Yeah. Like keeping being able to pay the staff, even if you hit the skid. So I guess you may talk to a financial advisor or an accountant or meet as a board to kind of decide, first of all, okay, what do we need? How much do we need as a rainy day fund? And I guess it's usually helpful. And again, this is a little bit thinking like a lawyer. And so some of you will groan, but you may want to think worst case scenario. I mean, not worst case scenario, but, worst case scenario, X donor who's been a pillar leaves, right? That's happened. I've talked to a lot of nonprofits where that's happened. Leaves one way or another, right? Is no longer giving to your organization.
Maybe
You know,
work backwards, like this.
yeah, work backwards. Exactly.
Go backwards.
Work backwards. We lost our biggest donor. Our federal funding got shut down. Our state funding got shut down. We thought we were going to get in this huge bequest, but then it didn't happen. You know, kind of think through some scenarios and then work backwards. I wish I had a hard and fast rule. I feel like I'm, you know, kind of letting you down, but
No, I mean, generally, I've heard either 60 or 90 days is 90 days ideally, I think is probably best practice, but I didn't know if you had a different opinion on that.
yeah. So Kay, for the folks online, said 60 to 90 days is a rule that she's heard. That sounds good to me. So having 60 to 90 days in reserve in case things really go dark, so to speak, and that you have 90 days in reserve. A big part of it is paying people, right? You got to be sure to be able to pay people. You're going to get in a lot of legal trouble. You're going to cause a lot of disruption if you're not able to meet payroll. That's the kind of the biggest thing. So, you know, how many employees you have, how much you're paying them, I think is going to factor into that as well. Yeah. Okay. One issue. So we talked about, right, articles of incorporation, bylaws, the 10 policies. We added social media. We added, what else do we add? Social media. Thank you. Volunteer policy. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Volunteer policy. We talked a little bit about employment documents, right? We talked about employee handbooks, employee agreements. One common problem in both the for-profit world and the nonprofit world is misclassification of folks who are working with you or for you. Independent contractors versus employees. Oftentimes, organizations, again, whether for-profit or not-profit, want to be certain or tend to want to have somebody be an independent contractor in that it's simpler, it's easier. Not always, not all the time, but there tends to be a little bit of a lean toward having an independent contractor. There's less liability. You can have them take care of their own taxes and all that. But you have to be careful not to misclassify, because if you do, you could be subject to, you know, all sorts of serious consequences. So, well, how do you avoid that? And I think it comes down to one key word, and that is control. How much control do you have over that worker? And I like to use the example of you own a house and you want someone to build a deck for you, okay? So you sign a little contract, they bring their own tools, they bring their own materials. They kind of come and go as they please. They take a break whenever they want. They use their own head knowledge, right? They don't really use any of your, I mean, you may give them, you know, I want this, I don't want that, this is the size, but generally they're using their own head knowledge to build it. There may be a deadline, but within that, you know, they come and go, they, you know, a roof collapse, so they got to stop the deck for a week and come back, that sort of thing. That's an example of a good example of an independent contractor, somebody using their own tools, somebody using their own materials, somebody using their own know-how. You're not really providing them rules. You're not controlling when they come and go. If you do have that kind of person, then I think you'd want an independent contractor agreement. Again, first, I think you want to make sure they're truly an independent contractor based on control. However, I think you should have an agreement which says, hey, absolutely, we both agree, you independent contractor, me, the nonprofit, we both agree that you're an independent contractor, right? I mean, there's no doubt about that. We're going to put this in writing. And then, of course, setting out kind of the, you know, what are the specifics involved. I think there's a tendency, because it's an independent contractor and you don't have to do as much paperwork as you do with an employee, that you tend to like, oh, you know, we can just get by and just sign any old thing and just have this person be an independent contractor, much like the person that you hire to do a deck, right? It's probably just a little yellow form, right? So I think there's a few, some things that you want to spell out with an independent contractor. I think we kind of talked about financial policies and procedures. Personnel files, I kind of already covered that too, in the sense that there's been so many times when I've been involved in employment litigation where people could not find the paperwork or the document, I should say, the document they needed. You know, they can find most of the, and in all cases that I've dealt with, I've never gotten the feeling that, well, you know, they destroyed the document, you know, secretly. It's genuinely you know, they've got 10 employees and their personnel files haven't been kept up. So make sure that you're keeping all, you know, you're keeping the handbook acknowledgement, make sure you're keeping all the performance evals, stuff like that. There's a few things that you should not include. The big one being medical info. Medical info should be in its own file separate. You don't want the appearance, you don't want even the appearance of you're making employment decisions based on someone's medical situation, right? Because that might violate the Americans with Disabilities Act or the Iowa Civil Rights Act. We kind of talked about fundraising, job descriptions. So I think, you know, job descriptions are so underused and underutilized. And I sometimes think when I come to a nonprofit, and, you know, sometimes there's the nonprofit where there's a big gulf between the board of directors and the executive director that's maybe got, you know, getting a straining point or even a breaking point. I think a big part of it is expectations. I think setting expectations going in, setting expectations every year, that can be done with an employee agreement, that can be done with a performance eval, but that also can be done with a job description, and kind of setting forth in black and white, kind of concrete goals, concrete things that this person is responsible for. What is the oversight going to be? How, you know, what are the priorities, major priorities? What are some priorities that aren't as major, but we hope you can get to them, that sort of thing. Also, if there is a dispute of some kind about termination or, well, anything, any negative employment action, it really helps to have a job description, right? An objective black and white document where you can point and say, well, you know, it says they would do 1, 2, 3, and they never did. And here's the job description that we gave it, you know, to them every year. We went over with them, and they just didn't meet the requirements that we hope to have on the job description. Questions?
Well, that's just as important for board members and officers as well as your staff to go through both things.
I would love to come out around and hug you, because that's such a good point. The point isn't this just as important for directors on the board of directors? Yes, to have a job description. They may be unpaid, they're probably unpaid. To have a job description for what are the responsibilities, what are the expectations for directors on the board of directors. So some of that is going to be in the bylaws, right? So you can't miss this many meetings, these are the requirements, you know, quorum, that kind of thing. But you may want to put that in more readable, more direct language, right? So kind of transferring some of the bylaws that govern directors into more readable, more direct, more blunt language. What is the job description of a director of your nonprofit? Okay, and always celebrate success. You know, in this world, it can be stormy at times. I think it's really important to celebrate the wins. Take the win. Sometimes you just have to take the win or win the day. You know, maybe you didn't win yesterday, maybe you didn't win last week, but today you had a win. So I think it's really critically important we're not too hard on ourselves, that we're trying hard, we're striving hard, but we're also celebrating the wins. An example for me, what time is it? I'm sorry, I have no clue. 25 minutes left. Okay. Well, I could tell a quick story then. I was working on putting together articles, bylaws, about 15 policies for a nonprofit group. I can't disclose who it is, attorney-client confidentiality, but it's a large nonprofit group that was consisted entirely of professional writers and editors. Like literally, that's what everybody did for a living. They were writers and editors. As you can imagine, we went through quite a few drafts, right? And that was great. We also had like a 4-hour, I think it was 4.5-hour Zoom meeting with some breaks where everybody went around and, we went through line by line these policies. After the 4.5 hours, I was sort of beaten down a little bit and sort of, you don't take these things personally, but there was quite a bit of change involved in the policies. And I was glad for that because then they were ultimately really happy. But after that, I felt a little bit, well, I mean, it just took a lot of energy out of me, right? It just took a lot out of me. And then later I kind of thought, well, hey, this is a win. They're happy, right? I'm happy. We got through it. I mean, one way to look at it is I spent 4.5 hours going through line by line all these documents, right? The other way to look at it is I spent 4.5 hours line by line going through all the documents, and now they're perfect for this organization. And that is a win for them. And, I might consider it even a win for myself. So, sometimes point of view can be really important. Okay, we've got some extra time. What have you been wanting to ask, but you weren't afraid to? Sarah, Claire, Jennifer, Anita.
Is there a template for bylaws?
There is. I think the IRS, if I'm not mistaken, has nonprofit bylaws, a sample on their website. I hope I'm not mistaken. I think they have, but the problem is, thank you. The problem is for templates. I mean, of course, going with the IRS is great, right? But the IRS is going to be looking at federal law and not necessarily, not Iowa law. So, but that's a good place to start for sure. A community foundation may have sample bylaws, or you may look at their bylaws as kind of a model, right? There's different organizations out there that, national associations that may have sample or draft bylaws available, right? The Association of Professional Fundraisers, the Iowa Nonprofit Association, the Nonprofit Association of Minnesota Community Foundations, whatever, I'm making these up, but basically, they'll have sample bylaws. In fact, they'll even encourage you to copy their bylaws. I just get a little nervous because there is no one size fits all solution, but at least that's a place to start, right? And kind of synthesize what you want and then maybe have somebody take a look at it. Yes.
I was gonna ask the same question about some of the policies. Are there some?
Yes.
Out there?
Same thing. So,
Same.
Yep, same thing. So you might look on the Community Foundation website. There's national organizations that have sample policies or draft policies. It's the internet. You might find something that is absolutely a gold standard policy. You may find something that's not as good, but it might be a good starting place. Kate?
I was just going to add, we could add a couple links when we send out the notes from this meeting, because the University of Iowa's Larned Waterman
Yes.
is an awesome resource. Almost everything you would want to know nonprofit is there, right? And Paul Thielen is an excellent resource there.
Definitely.
Also, the Iowa Nonprofit Association,
Right.
if you're
I did mention that.
Yep.
Yes.
not a member, there's resources there. For one thing, I know that they subscribe to some salary surveys. If you are a member, you have access to salary surveys, kind of back to your conversation about setting, compensation policies and things. So we can include a couple of those links out there for you as well, that are really great resources.
Yeah.
And then
So
locally, of course, the Cedar Valley Nonprofit Association has some resources.
So you mentioned the Iowa Nonprofit Association, the University of Iowa Learn Waterman Nonprofit Center. I think that's right. Resource Center. I think I might add the Cedar Valley Community
Nonprofit
Foundation. Yep.
Yeah.
I also might add a couple of others, kind of going through my mind to make sure I'm good. So, there's both a National Council of Foundations, COF Council of Foundations, and the Iowa Council of Foundations. They have some information on their websites. And then there's also some national groups that are pretty obvious, big national groups that have that kind of thing. Yeah.
Anything fundraising focused, of course, the Association of Fundraising Professionals.
Association, AFP,
Yeah.
Association of Fundraising
So if you're a
Professionals.
member there, you can get all kinds of different resources there that would be helpful.
I would say sometimes I think it's good to have an idea of what you want. In a sense, it's almost like house shopping. Like you look at a bunch of houses to kind of figure out what you don't want and do want. Sometimes it might be better just to hire somebody, tell them the general, parameters and have them kind of do the research. It really depends on how you want to go about it. How much time you have, how much resources are available to you, how many resources are available to you, what your personal preference is. But there's definitely stuff out there for you to at least get a start. Yes, anybody online?
Matt has asked a question.
Matt, how you doing?
And he's saying Matt from earlier. He said regarding friends organizations, establishing one for a small nonprofit, is it a valuable use of time?
Friends organizations, meaning professional advisors?
No, like friends of organizations.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, if you have the interest, if you truly have the interest, I would say, yeah. I mean, what's the downside? I guess you may be weak. I guess I'm looking, Matt, what would you see as the downside? So you've got, let's say the Lincoln City Library, right?
Correct.
And you want to create the Friends of the Lincoln City Library. Why not?
Limited time because it's establishing another 501c3.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah,
It's dividing resources. I think the idea is that you're setting up a 501c3 and you're sort of splitting goals a little bit. One is going to be more about day-to-day governance and kind of completing your mission, where
Correct.
the Friends group is going to be about obtaining resources, right?
right.
So programming, yeah. Fundraising and programming, fundraising particularly.
That would be my question is, are you associated with an organization that wouldn't be able to fundraise directly, Matt?
Not,
public
no,
agency.
I mean, United Way at certain times during the campaign, but
Yeah. I mean,
Sometimes friends groups want to be independent of the library or
Right.
the other entity. They
Right.
wanna Control those funds on other going to be spent.
yeah, so sometimes friend groups are they are independent. They're going to be set up as an independent organization, I think, and most likely, and they may want to control those funds. So that is something to be aware of. I have seen fights between, fights is probably a strong word. I have seen struggles or disagreements between the organization and friends of. Can you raise more resources with a friends of group? I guess, to make it worth it. Yes.
So I work with friends of organizations and especially in government entities.
Yes.
So, okay, you have a city and they want to build a playground or something. Cities don't fundraise generally.
Right.
But they have this group of people, my nice group of people,
Nice group of people.
and they want to do something. So I've heard it a couple things. People don't want to write their check to that government organization because they say that's taxes. And I don't want to give them any more. So they have this psychological barrier.
Yeah.
If they're giving it to the friends of, The other part is they know if they give it to the Friends of and say, we have a special project fund, we'll only release those dollars for that project. And I'm not good on city or government politics for local, but if you give the government money or your local, municipality money, they're supposed to use it that way, but if the project never happens, it can't sit there forever. So there's just some different, I think, assurances that people have giving it to that outside organization that is different than just going to your city hall and handing them a check. Okay, hopefully they're going to do that.
Right, it can get lost in the city hall.
I think it's a great point. I think that gets to Angie's point. Can this organization, when you're considering a funds up, what is their effectiveness or even ability to fundraise? If you're talking about a city or a county or any governmental unit, they probably don't have much of an ability to fundraise. As you said, there may be a barrier to a donor not wanting to write a check directly to city of blank because, hey, I already pay taxes. We're friends of city of blank. There may also be a better feeling about writing it to a friends group of a governmental unit because it's not going to be spent on this, that, or the other, but it's going to be spent on a specific project that you know about. So I think that gets back to Angie's really good comment, and your comments were excellent too, that we're looking, one thing we have to look at, a key thing we have to look at when we're deciding about friends of organizations is what is the capacity of the original organization to fundraise? Can they fundraise? Will they fundraise? What are the barriers to fundraising? And that's going to, differ. For sure, governmental units, governmental organizations are going to be in a special set, I think, all their own for the reasons that you so ably stated.
And those friends groups get a little passionate about what they're doing too.
And the city the city may be stretched thin where they just don't have the ability to, fundraise. And
well, or the friends group don't want the city to know how much they have so that the city will allocate as much as they can and not cut that library. But
so there may be some bargaining going on,
Yeah.
right? There may be some bargaining going on, where both sides are trying to get what they want. What are the other questions you have? Stacy, did you make it home?
I am home. Yes.
Welcome
I'm
home.
home. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions? Stacy, Matt, anyone here?
No,
Yes.
I'm excited with the information and definitely I'm looking forward to the recording just to kind of go back through and kind of reprocess. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stacy. That was very nice. And I think I have there's a PDF of both this outline that the people in the room have and the slides. There is a link, right, that you can download and you can share with anybody. So you can download the outline and you can download the slides both. And the recording is going to be made available by this wonderful community foundation. So kind of 3 resources coming out of this that you can see, feel, hear, touch, right? Okay. Well, I'm happy to hang around if folks have questions or concerns, and maybe they have something specific they want to, or maybe I just, maybe I said something wrong and you want to take issue with it. I'll be happy to address that too. No, I appreciate you. I know this was a long session. Not all of it was, super sexy and exciting, but I appreciate, frankly, very, very much your time and consideration, especially the folks here, but also the folks online. Thank you, everybody.